Hi everyone. This is Maya Zahira with Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and I'm joining you here from wonderful, warm southern Arizona. And we're beginning our Facebook Live now in our Facebook Live group, our free group, Psychic Protection Sanctuary. And I want to start off by asking you a couple of questions just to see where you are at. And I encourage you, whether you're joining live or catching the replay, wherever, I encourage you to go ahead and reply and answer this question. And I apologize, I'm actually still finishing up recovering from a cold, so I'm still a little bit froggy here. So here's my questions for you. Do you work with spirit guides? Have you heard of spirit guides before? Do you work with spirit guides? Do you connect with spirit guides? Do you connect with spirit guides for advice or guidance? Or are you on the other side of the spectrum? Because I do meet people who fall into this other side of the spectrum. Are you someone who feels that all spiritual entities, every spiritual entity is false, or is false light, or is demonic, or it's all bad? All spirit guides are bad for whatever reason or another. So no judgment. And actually, I haven't told you where I fall in that spectrum, so you don't know what I'm going to say yet. But where do you fall in that spectrum? Do you work with spirit guides? Do you believe in spirit guides? Do you know who your spirit guides are? Do you connect with them for advice or guidance? Or do you feel that spirit guides are bad news? Like they're all false light entities, or they're all, like in some traditions, the belief is anything like that is just demonic. So where do you fall? Okay, so right now we just now have some people joining live, so we might not have a lot of answers to this. But those of you who are watching the replay, I want you to really think about where you fall into this, okay? Because that is the topic of our conversation today. We're going to talk about actually what I think about spirit guides. I am an expert in psychic protection, and I have a lot of knowledge about what is false light and what isn't. Pardon me. And so it might be interesting for you to hear what my perspective is on spirit guides and where I fall in the spectrum that I just described. So before we get into our conversation, I want to do a few introductions and logistics, and then we will get into a little bit of teaching. So again, sorry for the coughing, but I'm always keeping it real. We're just going to go on with the show no matter what. Okay, water slurping and all. Okay, so as I mentioned a few minutes ago, my name's Maya Zahira. I'm actually an expert in psychic protection, and we actually just started a new schedule in our free Facebook group, Psychic Protection Sanctuary, where we're going live every Tuesday at 5:30 Pacific, 6:30 Mountain. So that's why we are here today, and every Tuesday I'm going to jump on live and talk to you about something regarding spirituality, psychic protection, psychic attack, and everything in between. So let's go over a few logistics real quick. I will keep it really, really quick. So for those of you who are new to my material and what I do, I want to give you some ideas on where you can get more information. So the first place is my website, which is psychicprotectionsanctuary.com. And that's where you can get information on my books and how you can work with me. I do have a paid academy, which is my premium program, Spiritual Empowerment Academy. And I have my donation-based group, which starts at $20 a month. So if you are ready for the whole thing and you really want to dive deep, that's my academy. If you're really tight on money, but you need support, that would be the donation-based group. And you can get information on all of that at the website, psychicprotectionsanctuary.com. So the focus of our Facebook Lives is on interaction and learning. This is a little bit different than a lot of videos that are on YouTube. And a lot of videos that are on YouTube are very polished and like professionally done. They probably have a team of people who are editing the videos. I don't have a team. It's just me. And I want to spend my time actually helping people and not editing videos. So that's why we keep it really casual here. I go ahead and upload these videos to YouTube. And I just now started uploading videos to, I changed them into audio, and I've started uploading them onto different podcast platforms. So if you listen to podcasts, you can now find my replays, the audio version of these replays, on the podcast channel Psychic Self-Defense with Maya. Psychic Self-Defense with Maya. So if you're on your podcast app on your phone, you can type in Psychic Self-Defense with Maya. But if you're on YouTube, that's Psychic Protection Sanctuary. Psychic Protection Sanctuary. So there's a lot of places that you can find all my stuff, and there's a ton of videos on the YouTube channel. Lots of free stuff. Lots of free stuff. So anyway, enough of that. Let's do a quick shout out to all of the people here live, and then I will get into sharing some of my thoughts on the truth about spirit guides. So let me just fix my device real quick. Okay. Hi, everybody. If you'd like to participate, go ahead and say hi and let us know where you are joining from. Okay. All right. We got a small group tonight. So we had a lot more people last week. That's fine. But if you're watching this replay, I really want you to mark your calendar. Put a repeating event in your calendar that every Tuesday, 5:30 Pacific, 6:30 Mountain, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern, or adjust to your time zone. We're going to be going live. And I'll be talking about psychic protection. So set a little like alarm reminder, and then you can hop on and join us each week, or watch the replay. Okay, so let's jump into our lesson. It's a real quick lesson today. All right, so back to our original questions. Hey, Katya. Hey, Brett. Hey, Sharon. It's good to see you. Do you work with spirit guides? Do you connect with spirit guides for advice or guidance? Or are you on the other side of the fence and you believe that all spirit guides are bad? So I actually fall in somewhere in the middle, I would say. And there's some reasons for that. It's just not random. But I want to share a little story. I want to share a couple of stories before I get into what my opinions are. So I've had a couple of encounters that really brought this subject to the top of my mind. The first was I was having a conversation with a friend at a restaurant. We're just sitting there talking about life and stuff. And all of a sudden, my friend stops mid-sentence, stops what she's doing, puts her fork down and says, "Wait, just a minute. They're giving me a message. I need to share this with you." and she shares me like this message about some stuff. I'm not going to say what it was. And actually, what she shared with me didn't resonate at all, because I'm really connected with my inner guidance, and I'm open to outside advice. Outside advice is great, but I'm so connected with my inner guidance that if somebody tells me something that's just way off in left field, I'm going to be like, yeah, thank you. And then in my mind, I'm going to be like, no, I'm not doing, like, I'll consider it, but that sounds way off, right? But my first thought was, we're just having a friend conversation, and all of a sudden, these so-called spirit guides are butting into our conversation. We're not doing a paid psychic reading. I'm not her client. I haven't asked, can you tune in to your guides and give me some answers? We're just talking about stuff and eating lunch. And all of a sudden there's this message coming through that's kind of it wasn't helpful information anyway, and, and so my first thought was like, this is kind of intrusive. It's a boundary violation. So, because we're just having a conversation, I haven't given consent for this person's guides to give me a message. And I don't know who they are. Now, I want you to think of, if you considered spirit guides to be like people for a moment, would you take advice from total strangers? Even if it's a friend of a friend, like, oh, my friend is calling me on the phone and she's saying that you should do blah, blah, blah. And you don't know that friend. You don't even know their name. You don't know who they are. You don't know anything about them. And you're like, would you follow their advice? Actually, a lot of people would, because in our culture, we are taught to move our awareness away from our inner guidance and to look outward, to ask other people, even complete strangers, for advice and listen to that advice instead of our own inner truth. So probably a lot of people would listen and follow that advice. But when I explain it this way, it sounds really weird, right? Like, is it really a good idea to listen to advice from a complete stranger? My second thought when this happened was, I don't know your guides. They're total strangers. So the first thought was, this is a boundary violation and this is kind of intrusive. The second thought was, I don't know who these so-called guides are. Like, I don't trust them. And also, here's another sidebar. A lot of people trust guides more than anything, even more than a person who's a complete stranger. They trust a spiritual entity immediately, like, oh, it's channeled material. They immediately trust it. And I'm going to tell you that because of my past experiences with psychic attack and with entity interference, I actually trust entities less. So where I see a lot of people immediately just trusting, oh, it's your spirit guides, so I, of course, said that's trustworthy. I trust them. I trust them less unless I have vetted them and I know who they are. So I would trust your perfect stranger friend on your phone more than I would your spirit guides if I don't know your spirit guides, because I know from my own personal experience how prevalent it is for there to be trickster entities that are pretending to be spirit guides. It's so common that it's basically what's happening with a lot of people's spirit guides. Like, I don't want to freak you all out, but it's like, it's not the exception. Okay. And so I was grateful that this friend wanted to help me. I personally find it it's kind of a pet peeve of mine. I find it annoying when I'm just having a conversation with someone and all of a sudden they are like, oh, my guides are giving me a message for you. That happens a lot in the New Age community, in the spiritual communities. And, you know, I'm not the energy police, so I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm supposed to correct people. Like, if that's the culture that they're used to being in and wanting to be in, then they're just being their authentic selves. That's fine. But me being my authentic self, I'm saying I find it really annoying and I find it to be a boundary violation. And I don't trust somebody's random guides, especially because a lot of people are in denial of this problem that is false light entities. They, even if they've read my book or they know about my work, they just kind of have this like blockage here that's like, oh, but I would never be fooled by false light entities. That would never happen to me. And so meanwhile, their entities keep giving me their so-called guides keep giving me messages that are clearly way off base. And I'm like, thanks so much. But no, I'm not listening to that. So that's my first personal story. And then the second story is I've had more than one occasion where I've been talking with a friend and they'll say something like, they're talking about themselves. So they're not trying to give me a message, but they're referring to their own situations. And they'll say something like, well, my guides are telling me that I should do blah, 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 blah. And then I'll say, well, I thought last time we talked, you said you don't work with spirit guides, or you weren't sure about, sorry, that you weren't sure about your spirit guides. And they'll say, well, I'm not sure who they are. I just get messages from them and I listen to it. And I'm like, red flag, you're not sure who they are and you're listening to messages from them. Okay, so you hear how that sounds. Now you might be listening to this and maybe you do that. And so I'm just like, when you see it outside of yourself, sometimes it's easier to see because there's so many people who do that. They pick up on this culture of everybody works with spirit guides. And so you start getting these messages. Excuse me. You start getting these messages and you're like, well, I don't know who I'm getting these messages from. I'm just getting these messages. And so I'm just going to follow what it says. Like, so once I am sharing this with you from an outside perspective, do you see how weird that sounds? Okay. But don't feel bad because it's kind of the norm. Like so many people do it. And it's just so much a part of today's spiritual culture that we don't even think about it. So, as I mentioned earlier, I actually fall somewhere in between. I'm going to share the other end of the spectrum for a moment before I share my perspective. I've actually watched some YouTube channels where they're talking about like quote truther information, and they'll say don't work with angels. I purposely put an angel over the shoulder in my videos so that people who see my videos are like, oh, she works with angels. So if they're one of those people that's like super extreme, like all angels are evil and they're false light entities, like those people will see this on my video or on the banner on my Facebook group, and like all the extremists will stay away because we don't need that. Or if they're open-minded enough to hear another perspective, that's great too. But anyway, I've watched these YouTube videos and followed a few channels where they'll say, well, you shouldn't be working with angels or guides or any of that at all, because it is all false light and it's all siphoning energy from you and it's all harming you. And I'm like, that's really interesting. And I kind of referred to those folks in my book, the Psychic Attack Sourcebook. It's my perception that people who are way over on that extreme, perhaps have had some negative experiences with false light, because false light entities are very real. But if you can't determine what is the difference between a false light entity, an entity that's pretending to be like a negative entity that's pretending to be something benevolent, compared to something that actually is benevolent. So it's human nature that people will polarize and go into an extremist view. So rather than recognizing that, there actually are actual angels and there are false light entities, there are negative entities that are shapeshifters that are pretending to be angels, ancestors, animals, like all sorts of things. And there's both. There's the authentic and there's actually the tricksters. And if you don't know how to tell the difference, if you don't have that sense, if you don't have that skill developed yet, it would be easy to think that it is all false light and to just throw everything out. So finally, here's my perspective. As you may have guessed, I do have the ability to discern what is authentic and what is a trickster entity. I want to emphasize I am not special in any way. For some reason, when I went through the trauma of the extreme entity attack that I went through in 2016, that I talk about in my first book, Darkness Disguised as Light, when I went through that trauma, which then resulted in a spiritual awakening period, it turned on some kind of ability, some spidey sense that I can see through false light. Like if anybody is trying to determine if something is false light or not, I'm the person to call. I do hope that more and more and more people awaken to this ability to be able to discern the difference of energies. My cat is trying to figure out what she's doing. I have the hope that more and more people are going to awaken to this ability of discernment. But I do have, at this point, I have this ability that a lot of other people haven't developed yet. Other people have abilities that I don't have. So it just so happens this is my zone of genius right now. So from that perspective, as someone who can really see the difference and feel and know the difference between these kinds of entities, I choose to work with authentic guides, angels, ancestors, spiritual allies. I do choose to work with spiritual allies. So now I understand, though, that there are people who, even if they could discern the difference, that they have been fooled so many times that they prefer at this time to just not work with any spiritual entities because it feels like a big vulnerability for them. And I totally get that. I have empathy and compassion for that. I think if somebody's been messed with a lot by false light, it might be a good idea to take a break from all entities or just work with, if there's one that you have fully vetted, like less is more. Just work with one or none at all, and just work with connecting with your soul essence, anchoring, connecting with earth energy, etc. But I feel like, as someone who has a history of being spiritually targeted by negative spiritual forces in the past, I actually found that it was really, really hard to fully protect myself at all times without having to constantly be in a hypervigilant mode, constantly on the lookout, constantly protecting myself. And that when I started working more again, because I was someone who did take a break from working with most guides for a while in 2016. And I found that after a while, I did very carefully and intentionally reintroduce some spiritual allies to work with me. And I, let me get a drink here so I don't go into another coughing fit. I equate this with going through the world, going through life without any friends. No friends, no support system, and like you haven't even signed up for like an automotive service or AAA or anything like that, and you're driving late at night and you get stranded and you have no friend or friends that you can call on to help you, and you don't have AAA, you don't have roadside assistance service, you don't have anything that you can call on, and it is completely up to you. And maybe a stranger will pass by, but let's say it's a deserted road or a dangerous road, and you have no help. Okay, so I think of it as similar to that when we're dealing with spiritual matters. If you are trying to deal with any level of spiritual oppression, any kind of spiritual challenges on your own, with no spiritual allies, no help at all, it's a lot harder. And I'm just telling you from my experience, it's a lot easier when you have truly benevolent, actually truly benevolent spiritual beings that have your back and that you have developed a relationship with over time. So you don't just all of a sudden call them when you're having an emergency. It's again back to that situation with friends and your car breaking down. Let's say you have no friends, but you met someone last week at a gathering and you talked to them for 2 minutes. You happen to have their phone number. Like, they barely know you. You call them up and you're like, help, I'm having an emergency. And they're like, dude, I don't even know you. Like, I don't think I should come and help you. Like, should I come and help you? That just seems weird. We don't even have a relationship. And it's the same with your spiritual allies. So your spiritual allies could be really dependent upon your comfort level and your perhaps you have a religious leaning or a particular area of spiritual belief. So you might be comfortable with angels. You might not. You might be comfortable with working with your ancestors. You might not. Maybe you have a very challenging relationship with ancestors, so you don't want to work with ancestors. Well, then that's fine. You don't have to work with them. Perhaps it's earth energies, like the ancestors of the land. the guardians of the land where you're living. Perhaps you're very earth connected and you want to work with those kinds of allies to help protect you and your home. Perhaps it's spirit guides. These are different kinds of spiritual beings that are assigned to help you fulfill your soul mission. Perhaps you feel comfortable working with animal totems, animal teachers, or plant teachers, or crystal teachers, just whatever spiritual allies or ally, maybe you just want to work with one that you feel comfortable with, that's what I would lean into. Okay? So don't pressure yourself to work with something that's outside of your belief system or that's outside of your comfort level. And if there's something that makes you uncomfortable, don't work with it. Okay? So don't work with anything that makes you feel uncomfortable. And also, don't work with anything if you're not sure what it is. Even if it sounds cool. And I know it's just so common nowadays for people to call on random gods, goddesses, entities from different traditions because it sounds cool, or they bought a little statue at a shop or something. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you should really do some research on who that being is before you're working with them. So the idea is you want to fully vet anyone that you're working with because they're part of your team. It's just like if you're an entrepreneur and you're hiring a team to work with you. Let me see if I was missing any comments. If you're hiring a team to work with your business, you wouldn't just hire random people who, like, you don't have their resume, you don't have any references, like you're just trusting them. So you wanna get to know who they are. I would definitely recommend at least reading the chapter in my book, the Psychic Attack Sourcebook, reading the chapter about false light. And if you want to have a better understanding of how tricky false light is, read my other book, Darkness Disguised as Light. And you'll see how it showed up in my world. So the more you can understand about false light, the better. And then also develop your intuitive skills, develop your inner guidance, your inner knowing, your psychic skills, whatever it is that you want to call it. Develop that spidey sense and be honest. There's so many people who are in denial because they want to believe that they have this really cool spirit guide working with them. And, but deep down, they have this weird feeling like something is off. If something feels off, that is your answer. Okay? That's your answer. So, once again, my perspective is I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, there absolutely are false light entities posing as spirit guides, and that is a really bad problem. It is very prevalent in today's day and age, way more than you might expect. So it's very prevalent. I would encourage you to step back and fully vet all of your guides, any guides that you are working with, and you are the boss. You have the right to remove any guides. They are not your authority. You are the authority over your energy field. So you have every right to remove anybody or everybody until or if you have fully vetted them. Okay? And then the other end of the spectrum of my perspective is that if you've dealt with any level of spiritual warfare, it's incredibly difficult to fully protect yourself and go through life without any spiritual allies, without any spiritual help. Like, even if it's like your great grandmother had some spiritual gifts and maybe she wants to show up and be a helper for you, then that's great. It does not have to be some ascended being. But if you have at least somebody in your court, it can be a lot easier. So you just don't have to be in extreme, hyper-vigilant, fighting state all the time. Okay? So what I did back in 2016, as I mentioned, I removed almost all of my guides. I used to work with a lot of different guides. Once I realized this very common issue with false light, I went through each of my guides and I had a conversation with them. So basically, I went into meditation. I tuned into them and I said, are you who you say you are? And are you 100% benevolent and here to help me? And some of them got kind of egotistical and pissed off when I presented those questions. And that is a red flag right there. If you ask them to prove that they are benevolent and working for your good, and they get mad and they show you some scary face or their eyes turn black or they lash out at you in some way, you need to kick them to the curb immediately. And that's actually what I did. I didn't have anybody that I'm aware of that was a false light entity, but I had a couple of guides that were working with both good and bad, and they had kind of their own agendas in working with me, and they were not of the level of purity of intent that I expect for whoever my allies are going to be. So I said, thank you for everything, and our work together is done. Bye. And I still continued to work with 2 guardian angels that I have been fully acquainted with since I was young. So I still had those 2, but I kicked everybody else out. And that's all that I had for a while until I, over, I don't know how many, several months it was, I became more comfortable with gradually, slowly, very intentionally calling in a new ally here, a new ally there. And then over the years, as I have worked with so many classes and held with so many students and clients and held space for so many people going through significant spiritual warfare, it has been necessary for me to have a really strong team, because I'm just one person. I mean, I do believe that I'm powerful and as powerful as you are as well, that we're all powerful. I believe that I have the power to do a lot of protection and clearing work. But with some of the levels of spiritual warfare that I've assisted with and with the multiple cases, it's been very necessary for me to have a team of spiritual allies who are assisting in keeping my energy clean and clear, as well as on top of the fact that I am clearing myself every day. I'm not expecting them to do it for me. Another thing that I want to re-emphasize, and this is something I hold true for myself and for everyone. If you do choose to work with guides, angels, ancestors, totems, allies, they are to be looked at as allies, as friends, as helpers. They are not your authority. You are not, I mean this, you are not to bow down to them, you are not to abdicate your power to any entity. You are a sovereign being. Even if you're working with a benevolent spiritual being, you as a sovereign being, if you decide that you don't want to work with them anymore for any reason under the sun, you as a sovereign being have the right to decide that. They don't get to decide. You do. You get to choose who your allies are or who they are not. You are the boss of your energy field at all times. Your guides do not have authority over you, ever. This is something that a lot of people get confused about. There are people that I have tried to work with before that ended up unfortunately not being a good fit because they were listening to everything that their guides were telling them. And even in some cases, when it was shown to them that they were working with guides that were false, that these people still kept listening to and following the instructions of these so-called guides. And honestly, whether they're genuine guides or trickster guides, either way, we should not be just following their commands. They are not here to command you. Okay? So you have to be in your own sovereign power. I want you to think of them as helpers, as friends. Just like if you had a group of friends in human form, they're not your boss. Like if your friend is constantly bossing you around and you're doing everything that they say, that is a very unhealthy relationship. You should not be in that relationship. It should be a relationship of equals where you are helping each other out. Let's say they come and help you when your car is stranded, and when they're sick, you bring them soup and you're helping each other out. Okay? So, or maybe there is someone who's in a position where they're better off in life and they're helping you more than you're helping them. That's okay too, but they're not your authority. If they are, there's something wrong with that relationship. Okay? So, does anybody have any questions or thoughts? Everybody's quiet tonight. Let me just glance at my notes and see if there's anything that I left out. So I'll just reiterate this again, that my advice to you is to work hard on developing your intuitive skill set, developing your inner guidance, not just your inner guidance and your intuition, but also develop your knowledge. Find out more about false light entities, and the easy way to find out more about that is through my 2 books. I'm not just trying to sell you books today, you guys, but it's an easy way for you to get that information in a concise way. And so that's actually why I wrote the books, is so that you could get the information in a concise way and a way that's very inexpensive. So there's a whole chapter on false light in the Psychic Attack Sourcebook, and then in my first book, Darkness Disguised as Light, you get a whole different feel for false light because you hear about my story of how I encountered all of this and how those gifts were awakened. So I think that might be interesting for you as well. So not only develop your own inner guidance, your own inner guidance system, but also have the proper knowledge and the understanding. Like in the Psychic Attack Sourcebook, there's a pretty concise chapter where I explain what some of the signs are of false light, so you can identify. Like if a guide shows up and they're acting this certain way, then it's false light. So make sure you know what those things are, okay? And fully vet any spiritual beings that you are working with. Don't call on random beings. And if you're getting messages from somewhere and you don't know like what those beings are, you really need to find out where those messages are coming from. And be truly honest with yourself. It's really easy to have wishful thinking and to think, oh wow, this is so exciting. I'm hearing this voice, or I'm getting these messages. But it's more important to be honest and look at what's really happening. For example, a really common phenomenon that happens with people is they will be in meditation, connecting with one of their guides, and let's say the guide looks like a being of light or whatever form it usually shows up as, and then all of a sudden, for a split moment, that guide, the facade slips, and all of a sudden it looks like something scary. If that happens, and that happens, I've heard so many stories of that happening to people. If that happens, then don't discount that. It actually means that you've seen a glimpse of what that entity really is. And what you were seeing was like essentially a glamour. You were seeing a facade of what that entity was trying to make you think that it was, and then you saw a brief glimpse of who it really is. So if that ever happens to you, immediately kick out that entity. There's no reason to give it a second chance. No reason at all. Okay? So, as you can see, I'm kind of in the middle here, where I don't want to be walking this path alone with no spiritual support. I need spiritual support. And so I do choose to work with spiritual beings, but I am the boss. I am the boss of my energy and who's allowed to even come into my field. And I've taken quite a bit of time to vet who it is that I'm working with. And I'm also very, very careful and watchful of any false light entities. So much so that a lot of people that I encounter, when they give me messages from their guides, I'm like, oh my God, it's so weird how there's this frequent occurrence that happens where people's guides, if they're false light entities, just get this urge to nudge the person to give me like complete wrong advice. And I recognize it when it happens. Like, oh my gosh, my guides just told me that you're supposed to move to this other state. And I'm like, no, like that's completely wrong. And that false light entity knows that I had a premonition that if I move to that state, I'm going to actually die. If I move to that state, the false light entity doesn't want me around. It's trying to give me this negative advice. It sounds weird, but that happens to me a lot. When I'm going through the world and people are working with guides that are false, those guides like want to get me out of the way. And they give me wrong advice all the time. So I want you to think about, like, if you're going to a psychic fair, you're going to a spiritual event, or you're hanging out with some spiritual folks, and they chime in and say, oh, my guides told me blah, 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 this advice for you. I want you to really think hard about whether or not to accept that advice, because you don't know those guides. It's one thing to fully vet your own guides, but do you know your friend or this other person's guides? Do you know them? You can certainly take whatever advice is given and kind of just like keep it over here. You don't have to throw it out. You can be like, okay, I'll consider it. I'll put it over here on the shelf. But don't just take in any like channeled or advice that's given from somebody's guides. You don't know them. You wouldn't take advice from guides just like some random dude walking along the street. Some drifter, right? You like, hopefully you wouldn't take advice from somebody like that. Or if you do, you take it and just put it on the shelf and then run it through your own guidance system. Okay. So if I were to put all of this in a nutshell, I would say, learn about false light entities so you have the knowledge. Really work even more on connecting with your inner guidance. Stop with this habit of looking for advice outside of yourself. Look for advice from within. You don't need messages from your guides. You need messages from your inner guidance. Stop looking outside of yourself. That said, it can be hard to walk this human life without spiritual support. So if you choose to work with guides, then you must fully vet them. Learn more about false light so you know how to identify it. Really pay attention to the gut feelings that you get and the signs that you get with any beings that you're working with. Be extremely intentional and careful with who you work with, and less is more. You don't need a huge team. Choose carefully and choose well. Does anybody have any questions before we wind down for the evening? Everybody was quiet tonight. Although sometimes I think everybody's quiet and my device is not showing me the interactions. So hopefully that's not the case. Hi, April. Hi, Dina. Hi, Katya. Good to see you all. Okay, so thank you so much for being here in today's Facebook Live. Again, set a reminder for your phone alarm for 5:30 Pacific, 6:30 Mountain, 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern. Every Tuesday, I'm going to go live. Some weeks, I'm going to keep it really short. But once a month, I'm doing a longer talk, which was tonight. The third Tuesday, I go longer, and I basically teach a free class. But I will be teaching about something, whether it's a short or a longer class, every single Tuesday. And then you can also follow all of the replays on the YouTube channel, Psychic Protection Sanctuary YouTube channel. And if you're watching the replay and you haven't joined the Facebook group yet, go ahead and join. It's the Psychic Protection Sanctuary Facebook group. And this is a sacred space in here. So I only allow new members to join who answer the 3 required questions that are prompted when you request to join. So if you request to join and you don't answer those questions, then I decline you. So you got to answer those questions so I know you're not a robot or a lurker. Okay, thanks everybody, and I hope you have a great evening, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday at the same time. Sending you lots of love. Have a good night.